Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Salesforce Architect in the Making, SAIMA 26, Building Scalable Salesforce Solution in CTA. Before getting started, I would like to introduce SAIMA Group. SAIMA Group is a group of people to support each other in preparing for the Technical Architect certification by creating and sharing content that helps to prepare for the certification. If you have more ideas on what we could or should do, please do let us know. Disclaimer, we're not Salesforce in any way and any form. All content is our personal opinion. A few housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself. Ask all questions on chat. We're not perfect. We don't know everything. If you spot a mistake, please do let us know. If you are interested in presenting or hosting, please reach out to us. Everybody is welcome. Now let me open our session and introduce myself first. My name is Crystal Zhu. I'm Salesforce Architect with CGI and the SAIMA Group co-organizer and your host for today. I'm based in Canada. Our guest speaker today is Hermanni, CTA and CTA coach, to present Building Scalable Salesforce Solution in CTA style. I will let him introduce himself in a moment. After the meeting, the recording and the slides will be shared on the LinkedIn and the YouTube channel. We'll keep you posted on the topics and the date for the next session. If you're interested in being presenter or host next time, please reach out. Now I'm stop sharing and make Hermanni as co-host. Thank you, everyone. Hermanni, please take away. Thank you.
Screen's visible?
Yes.
All right, good. Good time of day to everyone. My name is Hermanni Toivo, and I'm a Salesforce CTA and a Salesforce architect. I've been in the Salesforce world for 7.5 years now. It'll be 8 in the autumn. And I've been working both on the client side, but in consulting lately for the past 6 years out of that 7.5. And since last December, I'm also a coach. I help people who are on the journey to CTA on their journeys in various different ways, coaching through the different domain areas, communication skills, or whatever the need is for them on the journey. Today, we're going to delve a bit into how actually, when you're studying for the CTA and preparing the different mock exams for the CTA, how that actually provides a really nice framework for breaking down Salesforce solutions into scalable pieces that we can then consider when we're architecting the overall Salesforce solution. So what are the aspects of a scalable solution? And I would say the 5 main things that we have to consider is that the solutions have to be modular, standardized, performant, elastic, secure, and compliant. So what exactly does that mean? So modular means that the solutions are built in a way that we have certain parts of the solution that we can build independently of one another. That way, if we have a huge part of the solution that we build all together all at once, it becomes very hard for us to maintain it, to build it, and to make it scalable. If we build it in modular blocks, we can work on many of them at once, and that helps us deliver the solution faster. Standardized also helps us because that way we make sure that those modular blocks fit together better. So that would mean that we have certain standards of how we do things, how we configure things, how we plan things, are a certain architecture or principles. Performant means that we take into account that the solution, first of all, it actually does what it's supposed to and meets the business requirements, but also that it scales up when we start loading more and more data volumes onto it. Elastic means that we plan the solution such that if there are changes in requirements, which there are always, and not the system, the first day that it goes into production is the first day when it starts getting old because business requirements start changing. And with time, we do have to come back and change those things. So we have to make sure and plan in advance, how do we make sure that those changes that we do later on are easy to implement. And then the security and compliance is also a given that whatever we do in our solutions, we have to make sure that we adhere to the certain standards of information security that we need. So how do we take this into account, these 5 principles into account when planning Salesforce solutions? Well, the way that it sort of happens automatically and we start considering each aspect automatically is if we think about what we would have to prepare for a Salesforce CTA review board scenario. The first thing that we have to understand in the scenario is the project goals and overview. Then we start on more higher level things, thinking about the org strategy, how many Salesforce orgs are needed, and how, if we have multiple orgs, how that goes together, and what kind of org model we have in that situation. Then we have to think about what other systems are involved in all of this and what are their integration capabilities. We have to consider these aspects in the data model building as well, to make sure that the data model scales not only such that we can add large data volumes of objects or of records, excuse me, but also what happens if the business requirements change. And finally, the governance and the development lifecycle requirements are also there because the governance is a really important part for making sure that we can actually deliver using those 5 principles that I just mentioned. It's the key part in allowing us to actually do that. So we're going to go a bit in depth on each one of these aspects and how you can think about it in your own life the next time you encounter a need to implement Salesforce for somebody or in your work, and how just simply if you're on the journey to CTA, even if you don't become a CTA, how you can apply that knowledge and how it really gives you a framework for breaking down these solutions. So what the project goals and overview and that really answers the question of, okay, what are we trying to do here? What is the overall objective of whatever implementation we're working on and trying to complete? And this plays into the performant part of those 5 key principles, because the software has to get done. It has to get done. It has to be able to, the software has to be able to perform to the business requirements, and hence it must be performant. And that's where the sort of, without understanding what is the goal that we're trying to achieve, we can't build a scalable solution. And the questions that we need to consider here are things like, what is the business model and what is the organization like? What do they do overall? And what are the major problems that we need to address with the solution? And what are the constraints? What is the main thing we expect out of the implementation of Salesforce? Is it that we want to save time on our sales process? Is it that we want to get more sales because we will have better quality data and therefore we'll be able to sell to the right customers. What exactly is it that we're looking for? And that question has to be answered here, because that will help guide all of these other decisions later on down the line, so that you can make sure that your other decisions when you're building the architecture are in line with those business goals and principles. And this is the same way on the review board. If on the review board, there's a requirement that, or that their company is having issues with a particular field and they're looking for changes to help with that, what we have to do is we have to make sure our solution is actually geared towards that. And any assumptions that we make about things that will implement or things that will happen in other systems have to adhere to these overall goals and can't be contrary to those overall goals. Moving on to the next thing is the org strategy. And in the real world, this is something that very often gets skipped. Is like, of course, we're just going to have a single Salesforce org. It's all going to be in one place. It'll be too complex if we have multi-org. And well, that may be true. I've actually run into the situation where I've been doing an implementation project, and because there's been multiple business units on top of the same Salesforce org with a whole bunch of different business logic, but using the same objects, I was just wondering, like, why did we not go multi-org when this project began? Because spinning it off to be multi-org at the middle of the project is just impossible. It's more possible than consolidating them for sure, but it's still a very hard work to do. And you have to consider the org strategy just like you would in the actual Salesforce review board. You would do it in the real world as well. It doesn't have to be a very long and thorough consideration. It could be just a very, very short consideration saying, okay, our data volumes are not big. We want to unify processes. We don't have data residency requirements, no complex sharing, no high data volumes. We're just going to go single org. That's it. But the bare minimum I would say here is just at least state this out loud. Because if you haven't considered it, then it might come and bite you back, as it did with this particular client that I was working with. Another thing that you might need to consider here is then we have to go multi-org, but not only that, but it ties into the elasticity. So if we have a complex logic that we need to build for one business unit and for another business unit, putting those business units into the same Salesforce org might make it even more complicated than necessary. And then it's not going to be, the system's not going to be elastic. We won't be able to change things because it'll be so complicated that it's going to get very hard for us to do any changes there. Similarly, though, if we do go multi-org, we have to consider the fact that we have to keep things standardized in the orgs. Because if we want to go multi-org and maintain still some common things between the orgs, then that means that we have to have some sort of standards together in all of the orgs that we adhere to in order to make the orgs integrable with each other. For example, if we want to do some sort of group level reporting. And of course, going multi-org allows us a great deal of modularity when it comes to the solution. It sort of automatically puts that in that each org becomes their own module. And that does give some help, but at the same time, that does add a lot of governance requirements. Oh yes, and if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We'll go over them in bulk at the end of the session. Then when it comes to the system landscapes and integrations, what you would need to understand here as an architect to build a scalable solution is what are the different systems that are part of the overall processes that you need to be working with. So you need to understand what happens in each system at what part of the process, and based on that, understand also the integration needs that are related to that process and the integration capabilities of each system that's part of that process. And the way that you would then you would have to then analyze, like, can the systems that I'm working with here, what are the, based on the capabilities, understand, okay, what kind of integrations patterns do you need to do in the middle, and whether or not you have the need to use middleware. Because while in the CTA scenarios, and this is something that is a bit different in the real world and in the scenarios, you can put almost any integration through the middleware and assume that one exists. But in the real world, the vast majority of the time, even in large clients that I work with, even though they might have middleware systems, those are not used because that adds complexity to the development process, in that we have to involve another team of developers in the integrations. And those clients might not be used to that type of complexity, which is more of a governance thing, which we're going to talk a bit about later on. But it's these it's understanding the capabilities, because if their capabilities are not there for those business processes, then you sometimes have to think really outside of the box how you're going to complete these processes. And sometimes it means you have to change the process of how things work rather than change the systems and develop something according to the requirements exactly. And that's a difficult conversation you have to have as an architect in that situation. Then the other thing is, of course, if you do end up going for this type of point-to-point integration between all the systems, what happens then is the middleware tools bring a great deal of flexibility into your solution, and this elasticity into your solution. So having a middleware in place allows you to do integrations between two different systems without tying the business logic of those systems together. Because the middleware layer will be the one that each system is communicating with. And as long as the communication between system A and middleware is good and working, then system B doesn't care at all what system A is doing, is the theory, at least here. And this does mean that you have the elasticity to change the business logic in one of the systems without having cascading effects to all the other systems, if you have a single point of contact with the middleware that you just need to change, as opposed to the integrations with all the other systems that might be involved here. It also allows you to standardize the integrations better, because if you're putting the integrations through middleware, then that means that your integrations must adhere to some sort of standard that you're working with through the organization. And that does help you bring that scalability there, because all the APIs and everything will be working the same way. The developers on the team who are building those integrations will become familiar with that way of working, and it will be just easier in general to over the time to get that standardization in as part of the process. All right, let's go to the next slide. So drawing it out helps the same way you would draw the system landscape on the CTA review board. Drawing it out helps exactly the way that it happens on the CTA review board, except I would actually go a bit further and detail out, okay, what are the actual capabilities? We're not just going to use REST here, but what type of REST endpoints are available for us in that particular system? And in order to do an operation which we think we're going to have to do many times, are we going to do it? It might involve doing multiple callouts in order to complete that. Just so from there, you can get a big picture of what is the capabilities of all the systems that are involved in your overall system landscape. Again, the CTA exam does bring a lot you can use in the real world. You can't use it directly as such. I wouldn't go presenting to any stakeholder really the way that you present the CTA exam, but you can definitely apply bits and pieces of it and the idea of it, of how you build a solution and architect a Salesforce solution. Then the data model. And this is the next part that you usually build or present in the CTA review board. And that one has to do so much with the business requirements. So the business requirements are what drives basically any part of the design of the architecture. And when it comes to the data model, understanding those is key. So a lot of the time when I work with students who are on the journey to CTA, whenever they see the word customers make purchases, they immediately go, we're going to need orders in Salesforce. But that, I would say, is skipping a lot of steps in how we get from the requirements to a decent data model. And this process, which you need to practice in every single CTA mock exam that you do, and which you need to ace for the actual review board, this is a really key skill set for architects. And that is being able to understand, based on the business requirements, what are the entities I need to model? What are the relationships between those entities that I need to model? And first understanding that and understanding it comprehensively enough for all the business requirements at hand, and only then going in to build the data model and mapping these entities to Salesforce objects. Because if you start doing this type of deciding that this object goes here, this object goes here, this object goes here, this object goes here, and all of a sudden you get new requirements from the from the business, then your solution is not going to be elastic, and most likely you will not have considered everything that you need to consider in order to make sure that that your data model can stand the test of time and can stand additional business requirements that might come down the line. There's also things that you need to consider when you build a data model, like sharing requirements. You might need to consider things like licensing. So if you're only going to use a standard object for one purpose, as just because, you know, that standard object would make sense to put things in, is it really worth it to buy the additional license? I'm not advocating here that you're going to like build a case object to be like a shadow object of it. What I'm saying is and that is contractually forbidden by Salesforce. What I'm saying is that just because a customer calls orders doesn't mean that we are going to use the order object in Salesforce to model them. And then we have to also consider in the data model the large data volume issues. So if you have operational data in the system, that not just data like product data that's sitting there, but data like that's getting enacted upon and changing as part of the business operations constantly. So for example, order data would be such an example, or opportunity data, and any related records to those, which where you end up creating like junction objects of junction objects, or junction objects of junction objects of junction objects. You can expect a very high number of records in those objects. And that is not a good way to architect a data model. The same considerations we have to do on the review board regarding data volumes, we have to do in real life. And actually even more so in real life than the review board. Because on the review board, if you have, you can just assume that you can buy more data storage. But in the real world, we're working with fixed budgets, and Salesforce data storage, when you need it, at least in my experience, the only price you can get it for is the list price, and it's not very cheap. File storage is a lot cheaper than data storage. And so this planning, what are the data volumes that you anticipate in every single object beforehand? This calculation, which you do on the review board, you have to do in real life as well. If you don't do it, you will run into the issue where you possibly run into the issue of, oh no, my data storage is full and my queries are not performing, and things are just not going to work. So plan out these data volume calculations to make sure the system stays performant. And with the sharing requirements, make sure that you're not storing sensitive data on some object that you then have to give users the access to, and make sure that you can take care using the Salesforce sharing mechanisms of that, so that you achieve that security and that the compliance with those requirements. And then you have to ask the question, like, is the data really needed in Salesforce? If we're just doing reporting on the data, I would say it's not needed in Salesforce, because well, it also depends. Like if we're just bringing 2,000 records in Salesforce just for reporting purposes, yeah, maybe we might do it. It's so small, it doesn't matter. But if we're bringing millions and millions of records into Salesforce just for reporting purposes, I would question that requirement to see if Salesforce is the optimal solution for that. If you need to report on that amount of records, why not use a BI system? Because if it's coming from an external system, you would need to combine the data anyway. Why do you combine it in Salesforce and not some BI system, which integrates very nicely with both systems? Good. Then we get into the governance topic, which is my favorite topic of this. So we can actually build that, like from this point of view of building a scalable solution, the point of governance is that, and the governance model is to ensure that those mechanisms are in place to make sure that the scalable solution gets built. So meaning we understand who are the teams working on which part of the system, and what are the responsibilities of each team. And we have to have the organizational setup right in order to be able to build this type of scalable solutions. So for example, if we work in an organization that is very siloed, what we will end up with is we will end up with systems that adhere to whatever the requirements of the silo is. And then all of a sudden, if we have an organizational change that merges two silos together that now have to work together, well, good luck changing those systems, because they've been developed in silos without taking into account potential business requirements as such. So the key here is that the governance model that you have in your implementations has to be such that it helps consider these aspects of scalability almost automatically in the software development process, all the way from requirements gathering to actually pushing it into production. And that's why, well, when then the next point is about requirements gathering. So the requirements gathering has to happen in a way that we not only understand the requirements of today, but we also understand that what might be the requirements of tomorrow, and can already plan the system in such a way that whatever we do today and develop today will not hinder the development for the requirements of tomorrow. If we are sort of best guesses of, all right, what we might do next. Usually when you implement a project, you will outscope certain things to be implemented later because we don't have the budget, or we want to have the delivery on time, or another reason like that, or we might have another reason to do it as well. It really doesn't matter. But those items that are left in the backlog to be implemented afterwards, usually at least some of them will get developed in the future. So you should plan the system such that those things can be developed in the future to bring, again, this elasticity in the system. And then if we consider the rollout portion aspect of the governance, so how do we actually roll the system out to users? That also does have scalability impacts as well. Because if we're rolling this out and replacing a legacy system, then from a scalability perspective, is it really possible for two systems to be running at the same time if they have inherently different business logic, for example. And the users have to be updating two systems in that case. In my experience, at least, it's the only way to do it if they're significantly different business logic. Building any type of integration between the legacy system and the new system would be too much effort for how much it would actually take to, would be too much effort compared to the benefit of having it, given that we're ramping down the legacy system. Another key thing is the resolving of dependencies. So in the governance model, if it's very hard to resolve dependencies between different systems, so let's say we need an API opened up by another system because we need to integrate to it, or we want to do something there that they're really good at doing. If it's really hard to resolve the dependencies, the worst case that I've seen of this is we will just develop that capability into our system as custom development because it's so much harder to work with them than to just do it ourselves in our system. So the governance model that is in place has to really, again, help the teams resolve their dependencies and help them work outside of their own silos. And the architectural guidelines must be there to make sure that we have the standards and a standardized architecture. And then the teams that are working on the different solutions, sometimes in very large Salesforce implementations, you end up having multiple development streams for working on the same platform. And the way you organize your development in that situation, you need to make it sort of very modular, which part of Salesforce is owned by which team. But they still have to be working with the same standards and have the same standardization, because if they do not have that, then it's going to be very hard to integrate their work together into the same org. And last but not least is the development lifecycle. So this has to do with how we have the development streams, as I talked just earlier, versus how we have the Salesforce environments that we use for our development purposes and how are they organized. So this actually happened to me in the past, where we had a large development initiative, a brownfield Salesforce implementation, where we were developing a large change into their existing org, while at the same time we had active maintenance going on in their production org. So in that situation, if we are waiting, 2-3 years to push something into production, that's a large development effort. But at the same time, we have ongoing development in their org. How do we integrate this development together, and what environments do we need? So in that situation, what we had is we had a separate set of development and testing environments for the large stream and then for the active maintenance. And then when something was pushed to production by the active maintenance, we would, in our version control, back promote those changes to our to the branch that we were working on for the large changes. And of course, there would be merge conflicts in that situation, and we would just have to resolve them there. But that way, when go live time comes and it's time for UAT, we will not be deploying something from our side into UAT, which will be completely different to what the current system is, because we weren't refactoring everything in our large development effort. We were only refactoring for one business unit, a major part of it. And then you have to understand what would be good release cycles for the overall project. So from the scalability point of view, the usual thought here is the more often you release, the better. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. It really depends on the maturity of the organization when it comes to these types of tools for automated deployment and version control systems that are in place. Because obviously, the longer the release cycle is, the less benefit we have from bringing in new features. But the shorter the release cycle is, the less accustomed it is to larger changes and large initiatives that we make there. So balancing it out is the way to consider it and to do it here. And then, of course, if you've gone multi-org and you have some sort of package-based way of setting up the development, then that has to be taken into account. So what you develop into that central package versus what you develop into each org separately. And I think that this is a sort of it's a good analogy and a good comparison is what if we were developing a product to be distributed on the App Exchange, and we have a client or a customer who wants some sort of feature on that App Exchange app. We have to come up and make the decision of, okay, do we put that as a feature in the product itself, or do we build the product in a way that customers can do customization on top of it? And sometimes the answer is not clear. There's different ways you can think about it. And this, again, brings in that modularity, in that if we put it to be part of the package, every single request like this to be part of the package, it's not very modular. Then we're getting everybody's business logic and putting it into a centrally developed package, which is not what we wanted with the multi-org strategy. And with this package, we also aim to have a standardized solution across the board. But if we allow for all kinds of different customization on top of our standardized solution, is that a standardized solution anymore? So it's, again, these principles are sometimes in conflict with each other when we consider it. And then the elasticity. So if we develop everything on top of this, or these kinds of requirements on top of this centrally managed package, is the solution actually going to be able to adapt to changes? And if the business has new requirements, we'd have to develop a new version of the centrally managed, or it's not managed package, it's probably going to be an unlock package, but develop a new version of the unlock package, push it out for all of our sub-orgs to be tested against their in development, them to develop their own customizations that they need on top of it. It's going to make that release cycle a lot longer if there's changing business requirements rather than if it's just customization on top of the orgs. And these are trade-offs we have to consider. There's no right or wrong answer here. It depends how much we value one of these principles and one aspect over another. So with this, that actually concludes my presentation. Thank you, everyone, and I'll be now answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Hermanni, for the great presentation. You have provided us with great insights. And we all know journey to CTA is a tough journey. So if you are interested, everyone interested in the CTA coaching, so feel free to reach out to Hermanni. So right now it's open for questions. I'm monitoring the chat. Right now is one of the questions for Hermanni. Could you give an example of the complex sharing requirements that might drive multi-org? Thank you.
Yeah. So I have a concrete example of this. So we have a situation where we have a customer where it was a telco client, and telco companies do wholesale business as well, meaning they sell bandwidth to other telco companies to operate in, and to other companies as well. And there's a legal requirement here, at least in Finland, that the clientships or the customers, when they purchase this wholesale and when they purchase other telco services, these have to be kept separate in the system. And it would just immediately take care of all of our sharing requirements if these wholesale customers were in one system, and then or wholesale customers' wholesale business was in one system, and then their actual telco services were in another system. But now, because they were all in the same system, we had a lot of complex development that had to happen on top of that. So there's yep.
Thank you.
Any suggestion about the basic data models we have to know for CTA? So is there can you elaborate a bit on on what you mean by that question. I'll get to that later on. So thank you so much. I would love to hear you walk through examples that illustrate more of the trade-offs you spoke to. So are there any sort of specific trade-offs that you're looking for here? I can certainly talk about more of them. Because usually the trade-offs that we have is we might have trade-offs between these 5 principles that are part of what makes a system scalable. We might have trade-offs between them, but I would say that in most of the cases, the trade-offs are between business wants something very quickly, and can we actually build it according to these 5 principles of scalable architecture? And that's more common of a trade-off, I would say. But if we think about the trade-offs between each other, the trade-offs between each other, then another trade-off we might have to make is when it comes to the data models. So if we build a data model that is denormalized, that might allow us to save on the data volumes when it comes to the records, but then we don't start implementing junction objects of junction objects, where we store, related records not as related records per se, but maybe like a JSON string in some text field. Is that elastic, though, is the other question. Because now if the business wants us to implement a whole bunch of business logic according to changes in that junction object or child object that we're now storing inside the JSON string on a field, it's not necessarily elastic. It might be performant, but it's not elastic. And we have to make the considerations of, okay, is business going to require these types of things from us? Are these actual requirements before we go for these types of solutions? And another thing we have to consider is if we have standardized solutions. So let's say we have a standard that we need to build things in a certain way. What are the situations where we can break off from that standard? So I have, for example, a situation at a client I had where we actually had to break some of their architectural standards in order to adhere to them more. Whatever we were going to do was going to break the standards, but it was just a question of, are we going to break their architectural principles in one area or in another area? Yep, there is a question. Do we need expertise in Health Cloud or FSL standard data models for CTA? The short answer is no. What you don't need is expertise in a particular data model in Salesforce, the standard data model, and how that works. What is more needed is the ability to recognize what are the entities that you need to model based on the requirement, and the relationships between those entities based on the requirement. And then what are the actual requirements regarding the modeling? So for example, attributes, sharing requirements, things like that. Knowing the data model certainly helps because it allows you to think of, okay, I'm going to build a similar data model as in Health Cloud or in Field Service. But you won't need to know those data models by heart for the review board. What you need to do is you need to understand how you get from the requirements to a Salesforce data model.
Any more questions? Please submit your questions in the chat. Also, you can actually unmute. You're able to unmute yourself if you have questions to ask Hermanni. That's a great chance actually to learn.
So Hermanni, just one quick thing. This side, Hitesh Khatri. So when you say about, you just need to, when the requirement is coming, you just need to tell them how you can transform the requirement in Salesforce data model. Does it mean how we can transform the requirement within standard or custom object, or it has to be specific. Like, let's say if the requirements come, okay, this is the standard object we need to utilize, even if you don't know about the specific cloud.
So yeah, there are some things that you need to know about the core data model, obviously, like some of the core objects and what you would need to use those for. Things like work order, asset, case, account, opportunity, service contract, entitlements, milestones, those things. But you don't need to know about industry cloud specific or other products than the core clouds of Salesforce. I think there's a good YouTube video that I have of how to do these data models and how you go from the requirement to the abstract data model to mapping it to the Salesforce requirements. I can provide a link to that in the channel, or well, we can get the link to that probably, Crystal, right?
Yes, we will. Yeah.
Yeah.
We will include that link. Actually, when I upload this video to the YouTube, we can add related information there.
Yeah. So what is the next time was, if time allows, I love hearing you describe specific client examples, like your telco examples on some of the architecture challenges. Let's go into that later. I'll answer first these questions and then we can talk all about that. What learning materials do you recommend to you? So for the architect exams, the actual domain area architect exams, what I would recommend to do is studying those on Trailhead. And there might be some other resources and courses that teach the material to those, but I don't know how good those are because it's been many years since I took those exams. But at the moment, what I see is there's a lot of resources for gaining technical knowledge about in the Salesforce community, but there aren't many resources at all on learning how to apply the technical knowledge in concrete examples. So, which is what the CTA review board requires from you. It doesn't require you to know all the technical features and every limit and what are all the Apex interfaces that are part of the standard Salesforce. It requires you to be able to apply some level of technical knowledge that you have to make a working Salesforce solution. And it's a different skill to be able to apply your knowledge than it is to actually know the technical ins and outs. You can train the technical ins and outs, but no matter how much you learn them, if you don't know how to apply them, it's not going to be very helpful for the journey. I think a good analogy of it is it's like playing chess. The technical knowledge is like the openings. That's going to get you through the opening, but even if you win the opening, you will lose if you blunder in the mid game or end game. What is the importance of firewall if we're using on-premise systems in landscape? So the importance of firewall is that it makes the integrations harder. If we're coming from outside the firewall and integrating with a system within the firewall, then that means that we have to make a point of entry in the firewall to do that. And that requires some sort of proxy setup. Is there a specific framework to use when deciding between two important but competing principles? Good question. So usually there isn't a clear yes, no answer, what is more important. When you have to come up with an answer of what to do when there are two different competing principles, is you ultimately have to, based on the situation, put more weight to one of the two principles. And it really depends on the situation of which one is more valued than the other. So for example, if you want to compromise on elasticity over the performance of the system, then you have to understand how big of an impact and how likely is the future development that you are hindering by compromising on elasticity in order to get that performance. There's a hand raised.
Oh yeah, I was gonna build on that, but I think you answered it sort of at a high level. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you,
All right.
Rahul. Yeah, thank you. Thank you,
Not a
Hermanni.
technical question. What is your suggestion to maintain consistency in preparation while working a full-time job? Okay, this is recorded, but I achieved the CTA, so I can say this out loud. What I just did is I just put blockers in my calendar. I didn't necessarily ask so much for permission, but on Friday afternoons, I just put a blocker in my calendar and was like, this is my study time. If somebody was gonna told me like, no, you can't study there, I would have removed it. But sometimes it's easier to be forgiven than to get permission. But also this time boxing and having other people that you're working on the CTA journey with helps, because then it's not just up to you whether or not you're doing these things. If you've agreed with many people that you're going to do a mock at this time on this date, then there's a certain degree of commitment that you've already made to do that. And if you don't show up on that day with the exam prepared, then you can think of it as you've just wasted all the time from the judges by canceling on them last minute. So just committing it through other people.
Thank you, Hermanni. Any more questions? You can just unmute yourself, then ask your question.
I have an example, and I see in the chat Mia has asked specific client example. So something I can share from my work that I'm facing. It kind of ties into my previous question as well. We have built a service cloud implementation and have kind of gone live also. But we are learning that we missed some requirements, like it's a B2C kind of a service cloud model, but we also do customer service for our partners, so like a B2B2C model, right? And similar to what Hermanni was saying, there is a legal requirement to keep the access siloed to certain records or certain types of based on who the partner is, right? So meaning like you can't have the service data shared, like cases, contacts, they have to be logically segregated to different teams. Now, I'm facing this dilemma. Like on one side, we would want to keep contact as unique and the data quality as consistent. But on the other side, you want to also not have a very over-engineered access model, like access management rules with custom sharing and whatnot. So that is just one example, or basically how to build this sort of I'm going down the path of building this sort of multi-tenant system within one org. So not really a question, but I was sharing some more details and color of like in a scenario I'm dealing with.
Yeah, it's certainly there is the need to sometimes compromise like this. And sometimes, and this is again an example of if you don't get all the requirements in the beginning of potential ways where the system needs to go, you end up in trouble. Of course, you can't get all the requirements in the beginning, and it's a sort of trade-off between how much effort you invest into gathering all the requirements in the beginning and making sure everything is right versus getting a sort of light delivery that's, with a smaller budget. But thank you for the example. That's a good example.
Thank you.
I have tons of these. I have a question as well now that I think about it. One of my concern has been that I work as an in-house, resource. how important it is to get that sort of like variety in different flavors of implementations for a CTA?
So
And how can I remediate
size
this
is
thing?
what size of company are you working in?
I work for a bigger company with multiple Salesforce orgs, but we don't use like different combinations of products, right? Like we don't use CPQ, for example, or like the previous question was like there are specific types of clouds now, which is fine, but or one of my concern is also that we don't use different patterns of integrations or different types of authentication mechanism, um, which as a consulting role you have advantage to see these kind of things.
Yeah, and then at the same time, not, because you can't necessarily pick your clients. Like for example, I haven't seen an implementation where I've been directly involved architecting a middleware solution. It's all come to me through reading these resources and understanding of, this is what a middleware does. And then only now actually we have a situation where we're looking at a potential middleware implementation for a client.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, we in terms of the scale, some of our orgs are very large. For example, in some orgs, we have more than 100 million contacts and like more than 5 million cases every month. So that scalability factors is very it's resonating with me in this presentation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, good to hear. If we think of the other aspects of if you're in-house versus consulting, yeah, in-house you might not encounter all the different kinds of data models that you might in consulting because of the different industries and all. But I think that can be made up for just if you do enough of the exercises of understanding the entities that you need to model, building the understanding the entities between them, and only then going into deciding, okay, which one's a custom, which one's a standard object, and why. Before just going in that, this is a standard object, that's a custom object type of decision making. Okay, there's a question regarding your idea of storing a related records inside of a JSON string inside a field. In that case, you may need to build a custom UI component to show those records. Are there any technical downsides of this UI approach except dev effort? Yes, the short answer is yes. So what would you do if you have this type of querying, this type of JSON string here, and all of a sudden it's a requirement that you need to, in the system, query records based on query records in this object that you're storing inside JSON strings on the fields. You wouldn't be able to do it because the JSON strings, they would be in long text area fields, and it would be not a very performant way to make that query. It might be performant in other regards, and that's why you have to understand again the requirements when you're making these trade-offs of is it this way that you go forth or another way that you go forth with. You wouldn't, for example, you wouldn't be able to index the information in any way with this. Or you could, in theory, if you had some sort of other field where you stored indexes of what what data this contained, but you wouldn't be able to use the like or contains operator in selective queries anyway. So it would actually still not be very performant. Next question. When using platform events in the solution, is it right to send a complete record data or just notify the subscriber about the event with record ID? So the answer is it depends. It depends. So it depends what you're wanting to happen as a result of sending these platform events, and what exactly is the use case. Because while you can send the complete payload of everything that just changed in the record, sometimes you might not want to do that for reasons of, for example, the event sizes and the volume of events being so high that you can't monitor them all realistically. And you would have to check so much inside the details of the event.
Hey, hi. Hey, hi.
Yeah,
Mahesh here. Yeah, I'll elaborate
Yeah.
that question. So the use case I was referring to is I have to send order and order details, order product details to the ERP system, so that it can be in sync in the ERP system. So if that is the use case, right? So if I send order and order details completely, the payload weight will be more. And we
that's
don't
right.
know whether the subscriber can listen to that or not, complete payload, right?
Exactly. If the payload, if we have orders that has like a humongous number of child objects, and we're sending the order and order line items always with every single event, the payloads can get very big very quickly. And that's actually an issue that I've had in a project previously, where sometimes when a user did bulk transactions, the payloads of our platform events got too big. So that wasn't supported in our integration to have bulky transactions.
Got it. In that case, so can we send only the order ID notifying that there's an order created, so
Yes.
that subscriber can query again with the REST API or something to get the data?
So there's actually a very good follow-up question to you. Like, does the subscriber have the ability to query by ID? If they do, and if they can send a query to the Salesforce REST API, then you can avoid this hassle of two big payloads with the by having it query. But I don't know, because I don't know the details of the case of, for example, how many records you're expecting to have on the platform event, and whether or not the payload will get too big.
Got it. Yeah, but I got the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions? Please unmute if any questions, or submit in the chat. Has been a great session, very interactive. Any more questions? I will count. Last chance. I will count 1, 2, 3. Okay, so then thank you again for joining us today. And I will remind you to keep an eye out for our future presentations. You can connect us on LinkedIn or join our meetup group. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.